Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sam Moyer. I'm a research fellow at the Emerging Technologies Institute at NDIA. I'm very excited to welcome you to today's webinar, The Speed of War versus the Speed of Response, which is being presented in partnership with REDCOM. The pace of modern conflict is accelerating, and new technologies, joint operations, and increasingly contested environments require forces to adapt faster than ever. However, many organizations remain constrained by legacy communication systems that cannot keep pace. Reliable, interoperable tactical communications are essential to mission success, particularly across joint and coalition operations. Today's panel will explore the gap between the speed of the evolving operational environment and forces' ability to respond, as well as how modern flexible communications technologies are helping to close that gap. A couple administrative things before we get started. First thing to be aware of is that attendee lines are muted, so you'll be communicating to us if you want via the Q&A feature. So there's a chat feature that remains open. If you want to ask questions for the panel, please use the Q&A box. You can submit those questions at any time, but we're going to reserve time at the end for those questions. Another thing to be mindful of is we're recording today's webinar for future members who might wish to watch it. Now I will introduce our moderator. I'll introduce retired Major General Jim H. Keffer. Jim has had a storied career, both in uniform and in industry. In the military, Jim's last major military duty was to serve as the Chief of Staff for the U.S. Cyber Command and the U.S. Air Force's Senior Career Intelligence Officer. During his career, General Keffer also served as the National Security Agency's Deputy Chief of the Central Security Service. After his time in uniform, Jim joined Lockheed Martin as their vice president for future concepts and cyber. And he also served as the chair of NDIA's own Cyber Augmented Operations Division, which is now called the Cyber Warfare Division. And he's now the president of his own consulting company, which is Keffer Executive Consulting. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for that introduction. It's great to be back with NDIA again. I loved working with them in the past, and it's so great to be part of this webinar. It's going to be an exciting webinar, so let's all strap in and get started. For the audience, I'd like to let you know we're going to have question and answer period at the end. So think of questions as we go through this webinar. So hopefully that will answer some of the things that you're thinking about or you need some advice on. We've got a panel of experts here that really know their business in this domain. But you know, the title is called The Speed of War versus the Speed of Response. And that's a really wide area, but we'll focus on interoperable comms because voice, video, and chat, they will always remain critical to successful military operations across the board. You know, the Army has this motto, they say, shoot, move, and communicate. That's what we need to do as soldiers. Shoot, you can do individually, move, you can do individually, but communicate, you need other soldiers to communicate with, and that's critical if you're going to synchronize operations and conduct a mission. So we have just a panel of these tremendous experts and leaders that have been there. They've got mud on their boots. They've been in business. They know the challenges, they know the problems, they know the issues, and we'll learn so much from them during this period. Yeah, you know, I was reflecting back the other day, can you believe it's almost been 25 years since 9/11? And our defense enterprise has really come a long way since then in many ways, especially in the speed of response. But, you know, we still have to go further and advance in that area too, especially when you get to the tactical edge and tactical levels. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists. You'll be impressed with their backgrounds. We've got really, like I said, people that have got the T-shirt. Sean Osman is currently the Director of Business Development for Wittenstein Motion Control. He also serves as the President of NDIA's Florida chapter. So thank you, Sean, for doing that for us. He has 26 years in the Marine Corps and in various businesses across the globe, supporting businesses across the globe. As a Marine, he led communications operations, and he was the battalion radio chief. So there's 1,000 Marines in a battalion, and he had to make sure that they could communicate with each other. He's also been and worked on training, acquisition, transportation, logistics, and business. He had a pipeline of over $800 million per year. So that's a lot to manage from a business standpoint. He also deployed to Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom in Iraq and Afghanistan, and participated in Talisman Sabre, which is a U.S. Australian and expanded exercise. We next have Edwin Caricio, who is a solutions architect for a company called REDCOM. He's a subject matter expert in command and control and in the telecommunications field. He also spent 5 years as a robotics engineer, deploying around the world and designing and installing automated robotic equipment for all industries. And his tactical background is he was in the U.S. Navy and a coastal riverine squadron, and that's about as muddy boot as you get in the Navy. Patrick Vaughn also works for REDCOM. He's in the business development manager. He serves as a point of contact right now between REDCOM, NATO partners, and the U.S. Air Force. But before coming to REDCOM, he was an infantryman with the 75th Ranger Regiment. And for those that don't know, the 75th Ranger Regiment has probably the best soldiers in the United States Army. I'm sure Patrick would agree with that. They are America's kick down the door force, premier large scale special operations force, rapid reaction, direct action raid force. They're headquartered at Fort Benning, and they're ready to deploy globally within 18 hours. So you got to be ready to go, and your gear's got to be set to operate as soon as you get the call. He also served as a civilian contractor in Afghanistan, training partner forces, Afghan forces, in supporting NATO special operations. So he's been down at the foxhole level for quite a while. And the last one we had, but not least, is Michelle Cecilia. It's about midnight her time. She is in Indonesia. She's the executive director of GMG, and a company out of Indonesia. She focuses on strategic partnerships, business development, advancing solutions for the defense and security sector. And her work supports the delivery of reliable, interoperable, mission-focused capabilities that addresses evolving operational needs. So we've got tremendous panelists for you today. I'd like to start off first with kind of an operational context for the panelists to react to. The focus today for today's webinar is interoperable comms at the tactical level. Like I said, we have a range of experiences with these panelists. They bring a lot of background and experiences and expertise to this webinar. Most of them have served in uniform, deployed in combat zones, as I said, and they really understand the real implications of this topic and the things that we'll be discussing today. So today, I think it's important to begin the conversation by focusing on the operational side. Now, we have a range of threats today and conflicts. You can think of Ukraine, Iran, ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda that's reemerging, and that you can look at framing this conversation. So with that, I'd like the first question and ask each panelist to kind of reflect on their time in uniform or consider the ongoing conflicts and address how they think about the need for interoperable communication at the tactical level. Patrick, do you want to take a swing at that first? And then Sean and Edwin?
Okay,
Hello?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Apologies for that. So, yeah, I mean, right now we're living through a very interesting time. I mean, I think that we're at the dawn of a technological revolution, multifaceted. Of course, speaking about drones and the advancement of artificial intelligence. I mean, Jim, you mentioned, shooting, moving, and communicating. at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, I think that folks that were experiencing that at the beginning had no idea what the next 10 or 20 years would bring. And this is really no different. So, I mean, just in the past couple years, I mean, shooting, moving, and communicating has had, dare I say, a fundamental shift. Okay. So, I mean, that was like the key tenets of my time in Ranger Battalion. But shooting, let's start there. I mean, I would argue that the low cost, attritable one-way attack drone has become the new battle rifle. Right. And if it hasn't, then how is it inflicting 80% of the casualties on both sides, really, in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Okay, so that means the other 20%, that's airborne munitions, tanks, machine guns, everything else grouped into one, that's 20%. Everything else is drones. Go back in history and try to find something that has a monopoly on lethality like that. I mean, even the invention of modern artillery during World War I think was probably around 70% of inflicted casualties. So it's big, and it's important. So I mean, understanding marksmanship and like how we implemented marksmanship pretty much at every combat service within the U.S. military, and being that's such a focus of the infantry. I mean, now we're at a point where that kind of needs to shift. It's always going to be important. Marksmanship isn't going away, but that shift is happening, whether we'd like it to or not. Shooting and moving, okay, like we have to move different. I mean, laying in the grass is actually a pretty good way to get spotted now, right? So the battlefield has never been more transparent. And that is from drones, but it's also from AI. So, I mean, I go back 2 years ago, I was at NATO Edge, and, there's some Ukrainian soldiers there that were demonstrating how AI was able to spot enemy positions, soldiers, vehicles in an instant, faster than a trained observer could, and in a much better way, a much more prolific. So like, that's pretty wild. So, I mean, if you're on the battlefield nowadays, I mean, you're probably going to get seen. Now, not all is lost. And as we just saw the F-15 pilots and pilot and Wizzo that got down recently, using some tremendous like diversion and electromagnetic warfare. I mean, our warfighters were able to do a lot to get those boys out. And so hats off to them. And, you might argue that Iran could see a lot of what we were doing, but we did it in such a way that we were still able to complete the mission. And finally, communications, right? I would say that communications has probably changed less so. I mean, you certainly have the rise of like software-defined radios. I mean, that's kind of newer over the past few years. But, the problem isn't that the soldiers on the battlefield, they all have some kind of communication system, but how far will that reach? Where will that get them? And when they're in a denied environment, does that just go away? So I would argue, and certainly where REDCOM can come in, it's like, let's give the warfighter options. So when they lose communications, there's other things they can fall back on so they can still get those critical C2 comms to the right people at the right time.
You're absolutely right. You need backups for everything, because in conflict, you got the fog of war, you got things don't go as planned. And so you always want some backup in case the mains fail. Sean, based on your time in the Marine Corps and what you've seen in the business world, can you address the importance of interoperable communications at the tactical level and what it results in? Let's see, we may not have Sean.
Yeah, we may have lost him.
Okay, let me turn it over to our Riverine squadron sailor. Edwin, over to you.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you. I would say, in comparison to the time that Patrick and myself and the number of other us were in uniform and compared to now, is that speaking truthfully, when I was in the service and in the mission set that I had, it was truly not a fair fight. The technological advancement that we had over our adversaries at that time during the global war on terror, that the majority of us have fought in, is really was never a fight. I mean, air superiority was handled at the moment that we hit the ground. So shifting from that and now having low cost, attritable weaponry that now even nations with, if I may say, third-rate militaries can increase their advancement. And right now, I would argue that the United States is relying on those kind of older systems to kind of procure and go through programs of record and things like that. Whereas those militaries that are smaller and a little bit more agile are just iterating. They're trying something, it does or does not work, and then they're going to improve upon that and improve upon that all in real time. So they're kind of, painting a mountain with layers of that paint, as opposed to with us, we need to have those channels and those proper, almost siloed ways of getting our technology into the warfighter's hands. So I would say that now that the kind of combat field is a little bit more equalized, so is the technological kind of contestation between, like Patrick was saying, software-defined radios that are really fancy, but now you can use very low tech to jam very expensive and very nice equipment. So it almost doesn't matter at this point, where all militaries can be equal at a point that, as far as we know in the communication space, folks are catching up to us quicker and quicker every day.
Yeah, thanks, Edwin. To dig a little deeper into that area, can you talk about the importance of radio or voice, video, and chat to operations? Sometimes I think people don't think about it that much. They're thinking about, zeros and ones floating around, but voice, video, and chat continue to be, in my opinion, really crucial.
Absolutely. I would say the voice part, I feel like it's borderline self-explanatory, but obviously if you're not communicating with adjacent units and troops, things like friendly fire, things like mistiming on operational hits, those kinds of things can spiral out of control very quickly, especially when you're trying to control a large number of war fighters. So for that voice piece, truly self-explanatory. And at least from our perspective, we are very quickly trying to integrate these technologies, but they're kind of staying more or less siloed in their own spaces. So some technology that the Navy's going for is completely different than the US Air Force, where as far as their technological sophistication, they are abreast to one another. But as far as a technical feasibility for interoperability, it's now becoming more complex. So that's, something that we have to contend with on the voice side. On the video side, we are in a drone warfare world. So now not just as a weapon, but those are used as ISR or intelligence and reconnaissance devices. So now if you have a small squadron that wants to take a look, or squad that wants to take a look at something along the ridgeline, instead of now sending a forward observer, trying to get a human on that, they're just going to launch a one-way drone that has a feed. That feed is going to come down to them. And then, hopefully with some ease and some massaging, so maybe some integrated technologies from folks like us, they'll be able to actually take that and push it to those decision makers, so then they can make those target decisions and adjudicate that all in real time. So then they're not getting a description over a radio of what the target is, and maybe they try and put a larger, substantially more expensive unmanned asset over the top of that, where airspace conditions and all of that needs to be taken into consideration. We're talking in this kind of drone space for video is 100, 200 feet, well, right where that tactical edge is. And then chat, I would say the military's always run on chat. I mean, always. I even when I came in, it was running on chat. I'm very certain when all of my predecessors served, it was always the military runs on that military email and that chat, and that's how everything goes. So how do we make that easier for the warfighters at the edge to reach those echelons at, in the rear, and then up to, higher, to make those decisions and have, believe it or not, a receipt or kind of an easy flow, not just voice recordings, but having that text chain to say, this is how this mission was adjudicated.
Yeah, well said. Anything to add, Patrick?
Yes, sure. So, I think, so Edwin and I were actually in Germany right now. So we're at Patch Barracks today. We're at Kelly Barracks yesterday. So there's some like joint industry forums that we've been attending and just kind of hearing from the warfighters on the ground and what they're getting into and kind of how they've been interacting with the coalition forces and whatnot. So I would say that in a lot of those spaces, you hear, like, instead of voice, video, chat, when they talk about communications and communications interoperability, they're talking about data, which is kind of a loaded word. So that can be sensor data or cursor on target, like location data and things like that. And I think that you're hearing more and more about that stuff because with the kind of rise of the mobile ad hoc network and like the IP backbone is getting much more prevalent, and pretty much every military in the world is starting to kind of make that shift. Then you can have those things. It's much easier to share, that sensor data and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you still need people talking in order to, empower every other warfighting function on the battlefield, right? They still have to have, folks at different echelons communicating with each other, using their voice and making decisions. So that doesn't go away. And I think it does kind of get overshadowed because, like I said, this whole IP backbone infrastructure is newer, and how we're able to do it, some newer ways we're able to do it. But yeah, you still need to talk. Over.
Yeah, I keep thinking back in my days when we talked about command and control, there was command and control, and command were people. They were commanders. They had to issue orders, obey orders, carry out orders, and you had to do that. The best way to do that was through voice channels. And then the control was more of the data, how you executed and conducted the mission. We'll go back to data a little bit later, but I want to talk a little bit about, we talked about systems coming in. We have new entrants coming into the defense industry, non-traditional, not the typical big companies, but companies that have emerged out of Silicon Valley, got into defense and are doing fairly well. I won't name any names, but some are doing very well. They spend their own money. They develop prototypes. They offer them up to the services. The services seem to like that because they're getting those type of contracts. The thing I worry about with the bigger companies that develop these systems, they have operating systems that work them. The new emerging companies are also developing their own operating environments for their primarily AI-driven, software-driven, drone-driven capabilities that they're developing. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what do you think about the future in the integration of legacy systems, and which doesn't mean they're old. They're just older. They're not this new AI-driven, autonomous systems. With some companies developing their own operating system, what do you think the future is going to hold for the integration of those capabilities? Since you're very well immersed in the integration missions.
Sure. I would love to pop in on this because I would argue that the further we get along industry, and I think that the smaller, younger companies will be able to adjust much quicker. But no matter how we want to slice it, both our partners overseas, folks like NATO, other partner nations, as well as the United States, is driving towards a true open standards format. Too long has industry been extremely tight and very customized, bespoke solutions. And I think that as we're learning, that's incredibly difficult to iterate on because then you need to actually fabricate new things. You need to write new programs. You need to do all of that. So in order to get to a product that the folks want to actually utilize, it takes a lot. If you're going to do a very custom, very bespoke solution where you have 4 or 5 engineers that are in charge of writing an incredible amount of code, and they're the only ones that understand that. So when the warfighters need to come back to them, it's incredibly complex. And God forbid that there's any hardware adjustments that need to be made because that goes way back to the drawing board. So I would even say that with the newer, smaller, emerging players in this field, it's almost cyclical because I would say that there are larger companies that kind of stay in the know, but there are smaller companies that don't have the ability to have multiple endeavors at once, multiple research and development items to actually make product lines and have multiple, self-funded projects. So I think that something that we need to kind of observe is who has been in the game for a very long time, but is a smaller company that has a bit of a longer cycle for that, but they're actually listening to the warfighter. So when they do come around and have that new emerging technology, they seem like the new kid on the block, but they've been around, they've been in the game. They've just taken a little bit longer and have had a little more care in how they're producing that program. They're trying to listen to those warfighters. So, you know, it's a little bit of coming onto the main stage and coming off of the main stage. I hope that a lot of the new Silicon Valley folks are understanding that legacy technology is never going anywhere. An analog HF radio, I mean, even in this highly complex, jammable LPI, LPD environment, guess what still punches through that, you know? Yeah, a 20-watt HF radio is going to punch through that waveform. They might be able to see you very quickly, but boy, if you need to get those communications out, there's nothing stopping you.
And Michelle, if I could actually pick on you a little bit for this one. So, I mean, you know, you're basically leading a communications modernization effort within Indonesia. So, I mean, I know that there's plenty of legacy equipment with that comes with that, but then you're introducing a lot of newer capability too, and kind of figuring out that integration. And it's a lot of you doing that as well. I mean, would you like to speak to your experience on that at all?
Well, thank you, Patrick. I don't particularly have much military background as all of you do, but being on the floor and actually meeting these industries and partners, and obviously warfighters on the field, we realized that, as Edwin said, that these legacy systems are not going anywhere. In fact, they're one of the most reliable ones so far that are still contested through time, correct? And because we're obviously a very island nation, we comprise of thousands of islands. You can imagine the disparate amount of communication systems that we'll have to go through, and so many brands have gone through this. We actually had to use an existing system like REDCOM and introduce our own concepts and make them actually go through the test of waters here in Indonesia to actually find the right solution that we can offer, which actually resolves all the issues. There's so many systems that already exist here, to be honest with you, that says that it is interoperable, be it through software, be it through hardware, but it never actually solved the issue. The issue was, how can we bring all these systems together into one true interoperable system? And so we decided to implement our own solutions, and you know, by sheer will through all this time, we managed to actually break through something that has never been done here before. And it required a lot of introduction through cybersecurity, understanding that it is very important that through all this modernization and the speed that we are actually moving forward with technology, cybersecurity is one of the main points that we had to look into to provide a true secure communication. So that is our experience so far, and it really helped to find a partner that has a mature technology in this field, and we just added onto it.
Thanks, Michelle. Let me go a little further with you. We're going to touch on this a little later, but this is a good time since you brought it up. In the Indo-Pacific area, it's not like in Europe, right? NATO, you have got a NATO infrastructure, your countries get together, they try to work common solutions. And in the Pacific, it's not that way. How challenging of an environment is it to get the countries to kind of be more interoperable when they're, you know, worried about their growing their businesses, developing things in-house? How do you work that issue? That's just a big challenge compared to the European side.
Correct. I mean, even with our industries, they obviously have their own preferences, you know, like you're coming from, let's say, an Air Force, you have your own preferences. You're coming from maritime, you'll have your own preferences. That is definitely the case here in Indonesia. And I think it's more on how we communicate with them, how we make them understand that a true interoperable system, a true communication system is not based on what you prefer or what you're comfortable with. Is really what you want to be able to offer to everyone so that you can actually communicate. What is the main mission here, to be honest, to be able to communicate with each other, not just one unit, not just one industry or one regiment. It's not like that. So eventually, with the proper communicating and the proper instructions and letting them actually see the system and giving feedback and asking questions, we realized that they are open to understanding what it truly means for it to support their operations, rather than just us offering, like Silicon Valley, as you say. Offering new technology is nice and all, but it's not always the most suitable, correct? It looks very impressive, it looks very modern, but it's not necessarily what they all need all the time. Sometimes you have to rely on something that may look more mature, maybe you can say outdated, but you can just add something onto it, and then they'll start to realize, oh, okay, that means our existing systems can actually be used. We just need to add something to it. We don't need to add so many things or procure so many new things that it will cost us more. That's really how we are now.
Yeah, it's so important, like you and Patrick said, you got to sit by the customers, you got to ask them questions, you got to see what they really need, and then match your capabilities with what they really need. I think Sean just joined us again, dropped off for a while. So this next question has to do with, let's see, we did the operational side. Let's go to the policy side. So when I was in Sabacom, I worked the JADC2 effort a bit, CJADC2, the Combined Joint All Domain Command and Control, and I did that for Lockheed Martin a bit. I clearly saw that the technology is there to put all this connectivity together, but man, oh man, there were so many policy hurdles, not only within our own defense establishment in our own government, but also with coalition partners for the authority to operate, certification, cybersecurity, as Michelle brought up, coalition, connecting up to coalition, access to SIPRNet, all that stuff. So, Sean, from your time in the business side and as a Marine Battalion Radio Chief, can you talk about some of the policy challenges that you have to overcome on the operational side as well as on the business side? And I'd like for Sean and Patrick to think about that too, because it's such can be such a roadblock and to slow things down. And if we can get more people to understand the issues and the policy changes that need to happen, maybe we can move a little faster.
Sure. So just to do a quick check, are you guys able to hear me okay now?
Copy.
Outstanding.
5x5.
All right. So yeah, to your point, there's a lot of things with policy that definitely can be a challenge. I think one of the big things, as we've all been talking about so far here, is the speed that we've evolved, not only our communication capability, but how quickly we can go from the tactical edge back to what used to be considered a strategic and, division or AO type level access is now something that's available all the way down to your frontline troops. That's not something that I think our policies have kept pace with. So when you start looking at even things just as simple as classification authorities, when we're starting to send data back from, edge sensors and edge users all the way back up to division in one shot, a lot of the policies can't keep pace with that. So when we're looking at things like, I know we've talked a couple times about drones and how the applications are going with that. We have drone operators now at a platoon and squad level. That's something that used to, at one point in time, that was a division level access point that could be controlled. But now when we're having entire swarms of these things out there, the amount of data that's being generated, the things that can be accessed at the point of a tablet for an individual squad or fire team leader, those kind of things, when you think about what they used to be classified at versus what that data is today, our policies have not kept pace with the access to data that's out there. So when we start looking at how do we enable our warfighters to be able to do their job faster, one of those things that we really need to look at is how do we modernize the classification policies that are out there? When you walk into a command operations center today, when you're looking at the overlays that are available, things that used to be considered TS and above, that's now stuff that's almost table stakes for just going in and doing day-to-day work. Have we actually looked at how do we, I'm not going to say make the classification less relevant, but how do we enable the actual point users to be able to have access to that traditionally may not have been granted access to those things, but now they are the sensors that are generating that data. So even when we look at things like when we listen to congressional hearings about how do we deal with wireless access and how do communication things get managed, I can do now on an iPhone what used to be a battalion level requirement. So it's not just one policy, it's all of it. How do we deal with classification? How do we enable trust at the point of need, where in the past we didn't really have to do that? But I think really what it's coming down to is today, because of how fast we can gain access to things, how many different things we can bring to bear for the warfighter, we have to push down trust to a level that is going to make a lot of people institutionally uncomfortable, because we have it, it's readily accessible, and it's something that we can distribute very quickly. The unified communications, things that I can now do with like a Starlink that never would have been possible 10, 15 years ago. So that's really where I think, from not only the industry standpoint, but from the department level side of things, we really have to look at how do we recalibrate what levels of trust we're going to be able to provide our own folks. When you bring in the international side of things, our international partners, we've always traveled with them. They are more capable than they've ever been before. Have we really looked at how are we going to bring in those international partners, provide that trust, provide that focus, and provide that access that, again, institutionally, we are probably not really comfortable with. So I don't think there's one point that we can take a look at, but it's really classification authorities. How do we speed that up? How do we push trust to a lower level? And how do we as an organization get comfortable with sharing data at a speed that we've never been able to do before? So I think it's a multi-layered question as to how do we actually apply that. I can go down the road of like CUI and how that applies, but there's a lot of different things where traditionally things would have been classified that today, with the speed at which we can get access to it, are the things that we used to classify still needed to be classified given how readily accessible they are in the public sphere. So I think that's something that as a community, we really need to reevaluate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember General McChrystal, when he was still serving in the Army, he was a commander in Afghanistan. He'd always say, and I remember this because I like what he said. He said, "Release," and I'm an intel guy. Release to the point of being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And that seemed to be a good policy to follow. And now the problem is there's different people with different levels of uncomfortableness, but release to the point of being uncomfortable. Edwin, did you want to take a shot at that from the technology standpoint about the policies? What's holding you guys up?
I would say it's not so much holding up. It's just a way of that we're trying to think around current policies and trying to feed interest to make the policies a little bit more friendly to general industry, but the warfighter at the end. So something that, we have been trying to do as an approach just personally, as, our company, is we're trying to find larger partners, larger integrators that still tend to think on a small scale, still think about and stay focused on what the warfighter needs. The benefit there is that they can kind of lift up smaller companies like us that are direct problem solvers, but they now have the horsepower to actually come over the top and push, I would say, policy and push interest because they have those hooks into those areas. So finding larger partners that can actually influence policy, whispering into their ear while they can whisper in the ear of the decision makers, because it's very difficult for smaller companies to just go reach right over the top and talk, write a congressional letter or something like that to have some sort of incredible policy change. So having those kind of legacy folks in place and finding good partners within that to enable our technology to the warfighter is something that I think we can do in the now, and then hopefully what we're doing in the now helps address what we need in the future, because, you know, who knows when that's actually going to come on. And a bigger problem with policy is, you know, some of the main things is like multi-layer security and cross-domain solutions. Unfortunately, their ability to innovate or their ability to even design a product still is almost directly derived from policy, right? Because they want to actually build a product that will be compliant to that policy. So how do those folks, and it's kind of more of a general outbound question, how do those folks who their bread and butter is essentially following policy, how do they end up changing? How does that chain go? Because I know from our perspective, we just ride along what policies we're allowed to actually leverage and not, and, you know, trying our best to influence in the direction that we want. But at the end of the day, the decision maker is going to come out, and those folks that are actually making the products that do that kind of communication still need to adhere to whatever it was that requirement when it came out. So trying to whisper in the ear of the folks that can help steer the decision makers is probably the best that we can do at the moment. And then hopefully that will alleviate some pain, not just for us, but every company coming in and, you know, at the end of the day, servicing all of our branches and our warfighters the best possible.
So I'm
Yeah,
probably
thanks.
oversimplifying here, but in like some ways, I think about policy almost as a sliding scale of existential threat. So Edwin and I, we were in Cote d'Ivoire, Africa, a few months ago for exercise Flintlock. So you had Special Operations Command Africa, along with you know, many African partners, and there's actually a Ukrainian kind of innovation chief that was there as an advisor, and I listened to what they had to say. They kind of gave a talk at one point, and for them, because they are certainly facing an existential threat, it's as simple as this. He was like, "You have a capability, good. Is it ready to fight tonight? Okay, let's see. Did it work? Yes. Here's a contract." Just like that. Meanwhile, I mean, you know, the United States, as far as I know, is not, you know, at threat of being invaded by a nation state anytime soon. So, I mean, we can get away with having a little bit more policies. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to take a step back and find out, you know, the right way to go about something. You know, there's kind of two extremes, two sides of that coin. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to the speed of innovation, I mean, they over in Ukraine, I mean, they're bypassing all of that red tape, all of it. There is no JITC certification. You know, put it in the field tonight. You know, is it effective? Yes. Then okay, let's do it again.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Ukrainians have just been phenomenal in turning delivering innovation in the autonomous world, from boats to flying things to everything. It's just been really great to watch. Let's see. We wanted to have about 15 minutes for questions, and it's 1:44 now. So let me turn to question and answers and see if we have any questions for the audience. Here's the first one. Are there any workforce limits or opportunities for bringing this technology forward, or for using the technology we have better? Are there any workforce limits or opportunities for bringing this technology forward, or using the technology we have better?
So I don't mind jumping in and offering a thought on that. So one of the big things, and we've already talked about it, but limitations when we look at not just the policies, but the security access. So getting security clearances is a workforce limitation that we run into frequently, not just in the uniform side, but on the business side as well. Trying to get security clearances in academia, where they're doing actual research studies on how do we speed different things up or apply different technologies or come up with new innovative ways for retooling something that we've already got. That can get really, really challenging, especially when you start looking at using AI applications. That can either be for industrial manufacturing, that can be for data management, pick a topic. But the speed at which AI can correlate data, bring things together, and turn out something, one of the biggest limitations that I've seen in putting AI to use is the fear that it's going to essentially upstep a classification level just by happenstance, by gaining access to data that is at a potentially unclassified level, but taking it all, putting it together, suddenly you have a classified platform or a classified product that comes out of that. So having access to folks that have the ability to, I don't necessarily know if like a swinging level classification option would work, but if somebody accidentally generates a top secret thing out of a bunch of secret data, I don't feel like we should be punishing them for that. I think we should be figuring out how do we make good use of that and how do we apply that to a workforce where we can make use of the data that they've got and make use of good new technology at the speed of relevance. So really it's getting proper classification access for the folks that want to do the work and letting people do good work without letting the policy slow them down. So that's the biggest workforce strain that I see, and it's the same thing on the uniform side as well. Not everybody, especially on the enlisted side, has a security clearance, unless you're in a field that needs it. But frequently, people are exposed to areas where they're going to end up dealing with classified materials. So, trying to find a better way to give people access, I think that's one of the biggest workforce limitations that we have today, is giving them the tools and letting them use them where they can be used.
Yeah, well said, Edwin. Sean, this question is for you. Sean, you mentioned you have to shift trust down that institutionally we are not comfortable with.
Sure.
What level do you think is most appropriate? What's the level where we should be comfortable?
So I don't think you should ever be comfortable. And I know that's kind of it depends kind of answer. But the reality is, back to my point about having a drone operator at a platoon level, I have PFCs and Lance Corporals that have access to data that previously was division level access. We need to be able to give them access to anything that they need at the speed that we can provide it. We should not be still in the position where we're having to go through 9 layers of the chain of command to try and give permission to use something that's directly applicable to the folks that are engaged in the point of need. So really looking at, if you're going to be out, if you are the boots on the ground, or if you are the front point for the aviation assets, whatever that is, whatever communication capability that I have, I should bring that to bear to give whoever it is that needs it the best operational perspective and picture to be able to do combative operations at the point of need. So it should no longer be, we are at a point now, in my 2 cents, where we have the capability to remove gateway access. We shouldn't be doing, I need this approved by division, then this goes to battalion, then this goes to, stop all of that. If we have access to data, anybody that's in that communication chain from the point of access to the point of implementation, we need to give them that access. And that includes our international partners. If we're rolling with somebody to fight, we need to give them the capability to fight just as well as we do. That's really where I get into the speed of when does something that used to be classified now become irrelevant. The quickest point that I can also highlight with that, I don't know if anybody here was around when Google Earth first got fielded and we suddenly started seeing satellite photos that were as good as what we had access to in the field. That's a dynamic shift that we were not prepared for. We are seeing that same thing with relevant imaging and relevant capability. You bring in loitering munitions, that used to be something that you'd have to reach back out to coordinated fires to do. And now I just perpetually have this blanket of comfort flying overhead. That is a dynamic shift that we need to reevaluate. How do we provide that access down to folks that previously always had to ask for permission? I think we're at a point now where permission is no longer the thing. It's how fast do we want to let the actual end users do what they need to do the business we've tasked them to do.
Yeah, it gets back to the speed of response, increasing that. Sam Moyer, got a question here that's asking about how to get in touch with the speakers after the seminar is over, after this webinar is over.
I think I would turn that question over to our panelists. Maybe we'll reach out to you after this with any contact requests and see how you'd like to proceed with those.
And I think they're all on LinkedIn.
As I say, LinkedIn is, I think, probably the easiest access point for me. I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm just patrick.vaughn@redcom.com. I'm happy to share my contact info with anyone that'd like to reach out over.
So patrick.vaughn@redcom.com. Here, this is a good one. We talked about interoperability, coalition operability. So what are the best ways to create interoperability with non-traditional allies that we haven't worked with a lot, like the Gulf states or nations in Africa, or maybe in Indonesia, Michelle? What are the best ways to create that interoperability with non-traditional allies? We talked about sitting down with the potential customers, asking questions, getting to know them, their requirements, their needs. But can you add any more to that? I'll throw it up as a jump ball for those that want to try to tackle it.
Yeah, I can start it. So I mean, I'm kind of the NATO guy at REDCOM, and the way that they want to have communications interoperability is by everyone having the same waveform, right? Which is a very convenient thing, but that can take a lot of time to truly implement. Everyone's going to be bringing their own radios. Not to say that it won't happen at all, but that's a big ask. But I would say, with coalition partners and if, for example, Africa or in Indonesia, right? So I mean, really, our Sigma software and hardware solutions, I mean, it's really built from the ground up to do exactly that. I mean, if I can just shamelessly plug our what we do. But yeah, I mean, it has each of the hardware solutions we carry has 4 analog audio gateways. So you can plug any radio into that, any analog radio, any RTP or software defined radio. And now we can kind of get all those endpoints on an even playing field and have them communicate. So it doesn't really matter what radios the folks have in Africa or some other non-traditional coalition partner. We can flatten that out. We could pass it over LTE 5G. We can push it over SATCOM. We can just keep it on an IP network or push it up to SIP-based endpoints. It's really just kind of sky's the limit at that point.
Yeah, I would argue the point that Patrick is definitely driving here is flexibility, right? His aforementioned statement of like NATO's decision to move forward is that everybody uses the same waveform. That isn't policy. If you're driving it to, everybody's going to use this digital waveform and the radios associated with it are $15,000 US a piece. Like, how does that service other nations that are modernizing in real time and can't just blanket issue millions of dollars worth of, fancy new tech to their folks? So flexibility is that key. Going from everything from a leather-bound World War II magneto field phone all the way to a software-defined radio that has video capability and Wi-Fi and all the whiz-bangs, that's really what's going to service every nation, both from smaller militaries that are, pooling resources just to get units a squad-level radio and not just the team leaders having a radio, all the way to, these first-rate nation special operators that have every toy at their disposal and do it. So how do you bridge that gap is flexibility, really, at the end of the day.
I would throw in that there's 3 things that you got to focus on. You got policy and standards as number 1, you have training as number 2, and then you have trust as number 3. Policies and standards, you got to your point about the wave formats, we have that, but we can work in international things. We can swap out using different gateway methods. We can talk on different formats and hardware. That's great. Training people to actually know how to implement those things and how to use that equipment properly would be the next one. The last one, which we can't get anywhere near enough outside of the real world, is trust. The only way that we're ever going to bridge the gap about being able to truly work with our international partners and even in the US, the multi-services, you have to work together. You have to train together. You have to fight together. Once you've got that, what people are capable of, you're going to build that trust, you're going to build that resiliency between the communication chains, and you're going to be able to operate. The rest of that stuff is just things that we have to work on in time. But those 3 main categories are the ones that we really have to focus on, in my 2 cents.
And that's a nice list there, Sean. One question more on the technology side. As we now incorporate RF technology with ROIP and SDR comms using products like REDCOM, Sigma, and XRI, keeping in mind the friction of near-peer adversaries and contested environments, how should we frame the thinking about the next generation of military communications?
I always go
That's
with I always go with the theory that it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. You got your good scenario, which everything is working the way that it's supposed to. You've got your bad, which is typically day one once the first round goes downrange, and we all know what happens with communications once you start doing stuff on the move. And then you've got the ugly when you start getting into your degraded environments or actively denied environments. You really have to be able to plan for all three of those. And we have to be able to have a plan for how do we deal with it, because I don't personally believe we're ever going to see any environment ever again that's not at least partially degraded. And working on the concept that we have to be able to fight in a degraded environment and know how to be flexible and how to be able to innovate on the fly for when things don't go the way that we think that they're supposed to go.
And I would even add to that from a kind of engineering and technological standpoint, we have to keep in mind that as the simplicity at the UX or end user level goes up, what we're trying to do, the complexity and the automation and the things that the machines are doing for you in the background, that complexity goes up. So trying to figure out, as Sean mentioned before, how to train and how to make sure that those operators get one button wrong or do one incorrect input, and then now you're in a catastrophic scenario where your comms are down and everybody's fighting because a one should be a zero somewhere in some sort of binary bit. So trying to maintain the ease of use and ease of recovery for those next war fighters, as opposed to making a really nice UI, user interface for everybody to use. But if something goes wrong, it spins out of control and it's unrecoverable. In a lot of those scenarios, I would argue that the warfighters would say, just give me a plain old HF radio then. If that's going to be the case, and there's a risk of something snapping and everything goes wrong, then let's not use it. Let's drive to the simplicity. So how can we drive that technological advancement up, but keep the ease of correction and ease of use up as well? Because those more or less play against each other. So when they talk about legacy systems and then these ROIP and SDRs, you have to now have, an IT degree to be able to map all of these multicast networks and everything and make sure everything's going on. So how do we drive that simplicity for the next warfighter so you don't have to come in with a net plus just in order to be an enlisted warfighter?
That's a really good point. Looking towards the future, how do we make things better? We have 2 minutes left. So unfortunately, we have more questions and more chat responses than we can get to in the next minute or so. This has been a terrific webinar. Thank you to the panelists for participating. Thank you to the audience for coming in and listening to the webinar. And also thank you for all the questions that you've posed. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. I'd like to return it back to Sam to close out this webinar from an ETI perspective. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thanks very much to the panel. That was a terrific conversation, and I know our audience appreciated it. Let me move on to a couple of closing announcements from an ETI perspective. One big highlight is we have our Emerging Technologies for Defense conference coming up. That's a big industry conference at the DC Convention Center in September 8th through September 10th. The point of that event is to bring together leaders from both the Pentagon and the defense industry, as well as the investment community, to explore how can we move emerging technologies from research out to operational use more quickly. The program is going to feature keynote sessions from across DoD and industry leadership, including the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Emil Michael, as well as Acquisition and Sustainment, Mr. Duffy, as well as other speakers from R&E, A&S, SCO, and many other technology organizations in DoD and industry. The conference will have 7 simultaneous breakout tracks. It'll have classified sessions on the 8th of September, an exhibit hall. It's going to be a great event. If you're interested in attending, please check out registration on our website, ndiatechexpo.org. And more broadly, ETI is going to continue doing podcasts, webinars, research, other kinds of events that may interest you, and you can keep up with those at ndia.org/events. And that's where you can check out future events like this. So thanks again, everybody, for attending today's webinar, and hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you all. Thank you for attending. And that ETI conference is definitely worth it. I've been to several. All the best.
Thanks, everybody.